Good morning, everybody. Sure thing, Chris. We were just sort of talking about something offline, so I sort of wanted to put it on recording here so that we can at least go back and take a look at it later. But we were just discussing the technical approach versus the client approach, and it's always a big tug of war because a lot of people want what they want immediately. We've got millions of dollars in budget, and I can't get bloody AutoCAD software or something like that. Good morning, Harminder. I think it's important for us to recognize that although we do hold the keys to a lot of things, we also hold the responsibility for using those keys. And that's a very valuable lesson to learn. We had a group when I was over in the Pentagon. It was called OSD, which is the Offices of the Secretary of Defense. And it involved the Secretary of Defense and about 14 what are called assistant secretaries. And they were all part of one enterprise. And they had gone for years and years and years with all of their local IT guys, support teams, IT people, sorry, support teams. They were like, oh, give me a break. We'll get this later, or I want to buy this, but we don't yet have money, but the mission demands that I have it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody was getting all sorts of little concessions for over the course of years, and you sort of forget about it. Number one, you think you're helping the customers, but what happened at the end of this was that we did, and this is I'm figuratively speaking, this is a 4-letter word for IT services people. We did what's called a true-up with Microsoft. And because there were all of these little tiny groups, and each group was giving slight concessions here and slight concessions there, and saying, okay, well, we've got the money, but we've got to use it to buy tanks or whatever, everybody in OSD had been breaking a deal with their customers and literally pirating software, installing software that was not legally purchased, and they did not have a license for it at the time they installed it. Well, Microsoft had this cool new tool, and it was called a true-up tool, and somebody in the enterprise said, well, now that we're an enterprise, we need to run this true-up tool. They ran the true-up tool. I think it ran for about 2 weeks. And by the time it was done, Microsoft handed OSD a $1.25 million true-up bill and said, you owe this to us. If we don't see money, we're heading to our lawyers. We have to recognize that just because we have the power to do certain things, we have to do them in a responsible and ethical manner. And that's part of what we here call our code of ethics. There is a code of ethics in this mentorship program that basically says we will do nothing that is illegal, immoral, or unethical. In other words, we're not, just because you can install whatever software you want doesn't mean you should. If it's not legal, then don't do it. Okay? Legal, moral, and ethical. And then also, one of the things that we have to remember in our code of ethics is we will do nothing that reflects poorly on the people who hire us. In other words, we're always upholding the integrity of our organization. I'll give you an example. I had some particular beef, I'll say it that way, difference of opinion with my banking provider. the individual company that provided my banking services. And I was here in the mentorship program, I was talking about this particular company. And I felt, that was okay. We can talk about, stuff in the industry like we're about to talk about Wyze cams. But I was sharing about this bank. And then we had a mentor join who worked for that bank. And I had to stop. I'm now talking about that bank instead of the bank by name, because we will do nothing that reflects poorly on the employers or the people who sent us, the people who hire us, the people who pay for us to get our skills. We will not do anything against them or to cause them difficulties. See what I'm saying? The code of ethics means that I will also ethically defend my employer. So do me a favor this week, download the code of ethics from our page and take a look at it on Facebook. It is based very strongly on the ISC2 code of ethics, the people who brought us the CISSP certification. It's based heavily on that. So take a look at it, and that is my expectations for anyone who is in this program. I don't want to train gray hats. I don't want to train black hats. I want everybody to make sure that your ethical compass is aimed in the right direction when you come here and sit and learn. Okay? Any questions, comments before we move forward?
Thank you again, Scotty.
Sure, Chris. It was a great topic. I mean, yeah. DOD had no choice with that bill. It's like, what do we do? Change to a different operating system? No. What they've been doing is installing Microsoft Server everywhere.
It's also a great lesson for all of us to learn that, yes, the cybersecurity realm is attractive and it seems fun and it's lucrative and there's jobs out there, but at the same time you work for that business and that business needs to A, stay profitable, or B, do what they need to do for their mission, or the combination of both. And that's something you have to keep in the back of your mind as those of you who are learning, learn those skills, also learn the business aspect of it as well.
Right. Right. The business bottom line. And here's what your CEO will tell you. Well, just install it now and we'll pay for it later. Your CEO could tell you that. And that's where you have to put on your ethical shoes and say, that would be against the law, sir. I really prefer not to do that. I will do it if you demand me to in writing. Because remember, if you're the one that clicks the button to install, you are the one that is going to be held at fault.
Especially if you have your name on that button to install or approve.
It was installed by account J. Smith, So J. Smith committed the offense. So just be aware of that. Just be aware of that. I remember, and this was a couple of years ago, but I remember one of our individuals who wasn't thinking, and the customer came down to the service desk and said, hey, I need XYZ installed. And he was like, okay. And he installed it. And it had malware. But he used his Z account to install his admin account to install malware on a client computer. Sorry, dude. And I walked him to the door. And I took his badge and I said, I'm really sorry about this, but remember in the future, you are responsible for your own actions. Gee, I didn't know. Sorry. So. Yeah.
Also on that approval button, you're also responsible for the people that are the next step in the process.
Sure.
Who needs to do that actionable step. And good hints and advice for people who are aspiring to be managers, whoever's on the call.
Yep. It sounds like a real easy discussion, but it's not. And that's one of the things we're about to discuss here, ethics. What drives you? What limits do you place on yourself? Just because you can do something, should you? So anyway, let's talk about Wyze cameras. Did anybody do some homework on your Wyze cams? Sermon or Nerman, go ahead.
Hello everyone again. Yeah, I found some article. This article was released by Bitdefender. And I guess you know Bitdefender is one of the leading vendors in cybersecurity. And it was published on March 29, 2022. So they did some research and they found some vulnerabilities for those cameras for version 2 and version 3. And those are authentication bypass. The first one. The second one is remote control execution flow caused by stack-based buffer overflow. And the third one is unauthenticated access to context of the SD card. And I was watching some YouTube video regarding this issue, and so by now they released all updates, all patches for version 2 and version 3. But the first version of those cameras, the one when they started making those cameras like cannot receive those updates, so they cannot be updated, patched. So they're like still vulnerable, and they suggest customers to stop using those cameras. And but the thing is, it looks like that the way that I understood, it looks like it took them 3 years to do this, and they were hiding some things. And basically, they recently just released, like they recently told customers that those updates for version 1 cannot be, they cannot be patched. So, and I'm pretty sure they're supposed to tell customers that a long time ago. So yeah, that's something that I found out, and if you want, I can just read the description of the first one.
No, that's very helpful. Let's ask a few questions. Thank you for doing that, Nerman. That's exactly what I was hoping this whole team would do. So let's put a time frame into this. In 2019, I think it was Bitdefender found a vulnerability in the WyzeCam operating system for the WyzeCam 1, the original WyzeCam that sold millions of cameras. Okay, that was the big thing. It was a PC week. It was all over the news as being, you know, gone are the days of the $200 security camera, because this little WyzeCam 1 was $20. An internet security camera for $20. And so everybody was buying them because the reviews were coming out and they were saying, yeah, it's really good. It does what I want it to do for a bargain basement price. And again, here again, we get into price versus capability. What they found in 2019 was that, and you mentioned the 3 vulnerabilities, 2 of which I think if you take a look at it in the Bitdefender article, it says they had CVEs attached to them. In other words, they were identified vulnerabilities that had not been addressed in this WyzeCam OS. And the third one, and here's where I'm trying to go with this. The third one was unauthenticated access to the SD card contents. Okay? So, when the people who write the headlines, remember, headline writers are designing their news to be juicy enough so people will click it. All right? Always remember that. That's why you have to dig below that, because if, let's say your CEO is sitting over his morning coffee, her morning coffee, let's say that, over her morning coffee, because that was the example I gave, and she reads from CNN. Wyze cams have been vulnerable for 3 years, millions affected, and she's got a host of Wyze cams that, oh, by the way, you recommended and maybe even helped to install. Well, your CEO is now going to turn to you and say, what's up? So that's why you need to know not only what the headlines say, but what the actual story is. Never, ever, ever stop at headlines, because your CEO could come running into work and go, oh my God, I'm in, people are going to be staring at my kids while they're playing in the nursery or something like that. And you have to put the level onto this. You have to say, well, it does do this, but it doesn't do this, and this is what it is responsible, and this is what we should do. Okay, so there are because everything we do here at CS-Sensei is from a service provider's standpoint, you have to be thinking about it, not just, holy smokes, why is there a bunch of jerks, and then go back to work. That's not what you do if you were the CISO. You can't just say, wow, sucks to be you, to your CEO. Okay? So, Nerman, did you study anything about those 3 vulnerabilities? Did anybody on the call study about those 3 vulnerabilities?
To be honest, not. I mean, I did a little bit research regarding those 3 vulnerabilities, and I understood that the one of them, like they cannot see the context, but they can change your settings. But the first one, if they pass whatever they call, so they said. If they authentication bypass, if they perform that kind of attack, then they can change the settings, and then they can see like whatever you're recording, like. So, and I just was learning about some. I mean, they just give some. Advices like for those cameras, like to be put like on guest network instead attaching them to your workstation, so like separate network, and checking updates very often. So, but not really, like I really didn't learn about those vulnerabilities like
So I appreciate the research that you did, and you were on a good article, by the way. That was the same article that I pulled and started looking at it. But there are some insights you can gain from it, and you can also, just on that one article alone, you can also determine things like, how bad is it, does it affect me, and what should I do? Which are going to be 3 questions your CEO is going to ask you. Okay, so that's the important thing that we as service providers, or you as aspiring service providers, should think about. Is it bad? Does it affect us? And what should we do? And by the way, your what should we do needs to be extremely balanced. And again, not the headlines, because when you are talking to somebody who's in the C-suite and they say, what should we do? And you make a recommendation, don't be surprised if that C-suite customer writes a check and you have now recommended the purchase and implementation of a solution. This is not just idle conversation. So you've got to research these things, and you need to learn how to do it very quickly and accurately. Because if you just read the headlines, your first thought is throw away all your Wyze cams, because that's how the headlines are written. You know, everybody's at risk. Well, okay, but how much risk? What does that risk entail? All right, so you are on the right track. Chris, do you remember anything about the vulnerabilities before we move forward with the patching discussion? Okay. There were 3 vulnerabilities, 2 of which were covered in CVEs. The third one was the one that made the headlines, and that was the unauthenticated SD card access. So somebody who, wants to make headlines says, ooh, that means that they can get into your Wyze cam. Let me see if I've got mine here. Yep, hold on. I have a Wyze cam right here. Okay, so this is the Wyze cam. This is actually a Wyze cam 3. But this is the original camera that set the internet on fire, and all the technical folks were like, oh, holy smokes, I can't believe that you can do all the things that you do with this little tiny $20 camera. Well, these cameras, and you can't really see because it's underneath rubber retainers, but it's got a slot for a micro SD card. And I think in the Wyze Cam 1, it was back here or whatever. But so they said, this is a great camera. And everybody bought it. The Wyze Cam 3, by the way, is $35. Still a great deal. But then what happened was the Bitdefender in 2019 said, well, there's a problem because there are 3 vulnerabilities that have not been addressed in these cameras. And the big one is unauthenticated SD card access. Someone can, in the proper context with the proper approach and tools, can view the contents of that SD card. Okay, so that's the big deal. So number one, if your CEO tells you what's up with the Wyze cams, the first thing you can say is it affects Wyze Cam 1, but not Wyze Cam 2 and 3, and not other Wyze products. First thing, it's Wyze Cam 1. So that helps because almost none of the headlines said Wyze Cam version 1. They said Wyze Cam, because everybody, including me, my ears perk up and I say, am I vulnerable? You know, so I want to read the article. And remember, the headline writers are designing their article to make it juicy enough. And I say juicy. It's called clickability, but they do that because they're good at getting people to click on it. So headline writers tend to make something sound more attractive than what it may actually be. In this case, they did, because there are 3 versions of the Wyze Cam out there. The very first one is the only one affected by this vulnerability. By versions 2 and 3, it had been patched. Okay, number 1, Wyze Cam 1 only. Number 2, the reason why the Wyze Cam couldn't be updated. Does anybody remember that? The Wyze Cam 1.
Hey, Scotty, was it because it's a information of things device, and a lot of these are just programs simply with a certain program or Linux, and just kind of had no support? They were doing it for free, kind of situation.
No, but your point is well taken. nearly all of the IoT devices that are out there, well, let me grab another one. Nearly all the IoT devices that are out there could very well be based on what's called a Linux kernel. Why? Because Linux is free. Okay? Think about that. If you're, providing things like this, you're like, ooh, I could get this put in there and it won't cost me a bunch because I'm not buying it from whatever company. So you say that's a good thing. But the question you have to ask yourself is it able to address any issues that are discovered in that Linux kernel? The problem with the WyzeCam version 1 is it had an extremely limited amount of memory. It had a very limited RAM. The reason they ran the RAM down so low was the price point. They were trying to get this puppy into the market at a price point that you'd be a fool not to buy some. And then what happened was, in 2019, Bitdefender said, this is a vulnerability that puts your client's data at risk. And Wyze tried to update it and were unable to. And so Wyze's answer was, let's push the 2 and the 3 and let the 1s become obsolete and people won't want them. So that means we have to keep the 2s and the 3s to be a good, and the pan cam to be a good upgrade version for this guy. We'll make it to where they're going to buy replacements already. Those that have WyzeCams are going to buy WyzeCam 2s and 3s to replace these WyzeCam 1s. And that was their thinking. The problem is there are still people out there that are using WyzeCam 1. Okay? Why? Because maybe you can't afford. Let's say you bought big. You bought 20 WyzeCam 1s for your warehouse. Put them all in, and then all of a sudden, 3 years later, you find that they're vulnerable. I wouldn't feel so good about Wyze at that point. So that's sort of the balancing act that Wyze did and then did not disclose because they did not have a resolution for it. And it could very well have ruined Wyze early on. So from a business standpoint, Wyze said, we can't afford to disclose this. Money drove them to leave that vulnerability out there. All right? So now let's talk about that vulnerability specifically. Does anybody know the attack vector to get into that WyzeCam 1 SD card? Okay? They say unauthenticated access. So the first thing you think of is, I can get there from the internet. And the answer is no, you can't. The unauthenticated access to these, the WyzeCam 1 SD cards. Let me make sure everybody sees. It says WyzeCam V3 on it. Okay. This is not a 1 because this is still connected to my home network. But you can only get to it from an internal network. Okay, I'm dating myself, but does anybody remember NetBEUI or NetBIOS? A long, long time ago, it used to be the internal TCP/IP that you would run on a network. And the great advantage of NetBIOS or NetBEUI was that it would not traverse a router or a switch. So you'd have your internal network running NetBIOS or NetBEUI, and it would go to a router, and a router would say, not going my way. Well, the WyzeCam version 1 was only vulnerable to something that was internal to the network. The only way it would be totally vulnerable is if you put it on the internet proper. But remember, your local network is protected by your Wi-Fi router. Okay? So it would have blocked the data calls that would have been going down here to the WizeCam 1 to make it show you the SD card contents. So, number 1, WizeCam version 1. Number 2, internal networks only. So, your CEO says, what do I do? What do you tell him? What do I do about this? What do you recommend? And remember, your CEO is standing there with a blank checkbook saying, do I need to invest in replacements? What do we do today? Should we bring everything down and turn off our viewing for our, warehouse, for example? What should we do? What do you recommend?
I wonder if we can put these cameras on an isolated network.
Did you hear it? If it is only vulnerable while it's in an internal network, then make a more internal network and make sure that it is fully insulated. That's called logical segregation. Not physical, but logical. Put them with IP addresses that are not addressable externally. Make sure that you have, for example, NAT turned off at your router so that the bytes will never touch those cameras. And then, over time, program to replace them. Very good call, Chris. That's exactly what I would have recommended. Make sure that none of these puppies are out there internet touchable. Make sense? Everybody? Did you learn something from this? I mean, that's as far as I wanted to go with it, but, you're going to reach a point where somebody is going to place their trust in you, and that's why you have to be balanced, and you have to be informed. Nerman.
Yeah, I have a question. If we put those cameras like in isolated network, and if it's like Wi-Fi network, I'm trying to figure out if it's Wi-Fi network, and if someone get access to our Wi-Fi, are they going still to be able to get access to those cameras? Right?
The answer is yes.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but the way to get like access to Wi-Fi, they have to be close to the house or whatever, like right.
This is where you get into again the logical segregation within your Wi-Fi network. You can program multiple networks. When we talk about it in like switch technology, it's called a virtual LAN.
Oh yeah.
VLAN. Okay? So you put a camera-only VLAN.
Okay.
You have a camera-only VLAN, and you have a wireless customer-only VLAN. They're operating on the same airwaves, but they are in a virtual LAN that cannot touch the other virtual LAN without going through the router, which will not pass the data. See what I'm saying? It's like you have put it into a place where you can manage what bytes touch it.
So it will be separate network, but it will be virtual network actually.
Correct, a virtual network.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. I recommend you take a look at VLANs, VLANs.
Yeah. Yeah. I
my
actually like for all my devices, virtual network. Yeah. I actually add the license to my watch card for virtual local area networks.
Right. Well, imagine my employer, for example. Imagine having, I don't know, let's say 400 security cameras located all across the nation, and entry control points and wireless networking that, by the way, the customers that have home devices want what's called BYOD, bring your own device, but those that have devices that were paid for by your organization want full authenticated access. These are all running on the same network. And the way they do it is they split them into what are called VLANs, typically VLANs. There are other ways to do it, but the VLAN is the most popular way to do it. But here's the other thing. Think big. If you're designing something, let's say for your company, and your company is 40 employees, sounds like it's no big deal. But what happens if they become 400? What happens if they open that California subsidiary? What happens if they offshore to Pakistan? You know, think about these things so you can design things. Make each VLAN capable of holding 1,000 devices. Not just, I want to put my 2 cameras in this VLAN, and I want to put my internet toaster in this one, or whatever. Think about designing an infrastructure that is scalable. It'll hold 200 as easily as it'll hold 2. That way, you are always thinking about something that you can then take to work for you and say, yeah, I set up a network that was capable of supporting this many devices. Oh, really? Where'd you do it? In my basement? But you designed it to where it could handle that many devices. See what I'm saying? And all you did was you thought about applicability later on, extensibility later on. Okay? So always be thinking about that big picture when you're doing it. Okay? So we've spent 40 minutes on that. But let's go to the last one. The ethics of CyberWar. Somebody want to give me your thoughts or your impression of what's been going on with Russia and the Ukraine from a cybersecurity standpoint?
I would like to know what's going on in Russia's mind.
Okay. Well, let's lay the groundwork for this first. Russia has, on at least 2 occasions, tried to connect into and down the Ukraine's power grid. 2 separate occasions, not the same attack. They launched a cyber attack and they were repelled. Ukraine kept their lights on, and then they went back to their lab and modified things a little bit to make it, more pernicious, more angry when it came across to the Ukraine, and then they launched it a second time. And the Ukraine infrastructure was resilient enough to stop it. Now, the question you run into is, are the Ukraine our allies?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, Ukraine has joined NATO. They signed the paperwork. They are now NATO allies. And in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they state an attack against one is an attack against all. That's what allies they do. If you're too small and you keep getting beat up in the playground, you go make friends with the biggest kid in the playground and hang out with him. So if somebody comes over and tries to beat up you, you point to your big brother and say, go get him. Well, here's the problem. We are that big brother. So Ukraine, and by the way, this is the reason Russia says they invaded Ukraine. Because Ukraine was directly adjacent to them geographically, and Ukraine joined NATO, that moved the NATO threat this much closer to Russia.
Okay.
So Putin was saying, you guys are moving missiles even closer to us. You guys meaning NATO. And guess who started NATO? The U.S.
Well, he feels threatened. Okay. Russia feels threatened.
Because now you're closer.
Mm-hmm. It's their version back in '69. It's their version of Cuba back in '69.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the reason we talk about the ethics of cyber war, remember, what applies to the good guys applies to the bad guys who think they're good guys. Okay? So when you are now having a conversation with the Ukrainian IT cybersecurity folks, you want to help them, but Russia is already saying the reason we're attacking you is because you're in NATO. So you saw Douglas's response. I hope everybody saw Douglas's response on Facebook. He basically said we shouldn't let down our guard. We America should stay true to our obligations. And I'm not disputing that at all. But what that also means is we are now party to a cyber war with Russia. And Russia has both the capability and the, what's it called, motive? when you conduct a crime, means, motive, and opportunity. Well, Russia has all three of those now. So why would they not attack us? Because we're now part of the Ukrainian hostile group against Russia. That's the challenge we run into. So I can tell you what the U.S. and I will say the U.S. and likely Israel are already doing. They're providing support, but in a top secret role. And if you remember when we talked about security classifications, they were anything of which disclosure is a danger to the United States or a severe danger. Major damage could be done to the United States. So what they do is they classify it, and that means it's only held by a certain number of people. But, okay, but it could still be that we are conducting, and I'm just speculating here, it could be that we are conducting classified cyber warfare operations against another nation state because they were attacking our allies. So remember, I said this a few weeks ago. Because of cyber war, we should expect fallout. Or we can say, you know, these legislators have prepared us, our president and past presidents have prepared us to the point where we're not vulnerable. And if anybody thinks that, I've got a lesson for you. We are vulnerable. People are being compromised Systems are being compromised. Infrastructures are being compromised on a daily basis to the tune of billions of dollars of loss. So anybody who thinks that your lights are going to stay on because, well, America's good, be careful. Be careful. See what I'm saying? The ethics are that there are advantages and disadvantages to doing anything and also to not doing something. And you have to find an answer because you cannot not decide.
I think, Scotty, it's probably best to have your personal mission statement and your personal purposes in your own view when making those decisions, and why I asked the question that I asked of what's Russia thinking.
Right.
And I know the direct answer is they were threatened. But now I know that, hey, Russia is being threatened by us as NATO. I look at it from the other end and I'm glad I learned history. And this is the reason why you learned history in your bachelor's.
Right.
The Cuban Missile Crisis here in the United States back in 1969 is almost similar. It's not exact.
Right.
But in short summary, Russia brought a missile to Cuba, or missiles to Cuba, and Kennedy was our President John F. Kennedy was in a position to say, shoot, what am I going to do?
Right.
If they shoot this missile, we're dead. I have to make phone calls and say, Russia, what are you doing?
Yep.
And use that diplomacy there. Now Russia's in the same territory. Russia is sitting there going, Ukraine is trying to join NATO. Those missiles are probably going to come close to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel threatened. It's like they say it's an existential crisis. I'm not sure if that's the correct term or not, but I feel though in this position, I work under my government or my company, my organization, and I'm going to defend my corporation, my organization, because that's where my bread and butter is going to be in the end. But know with the risk and consequences when I do my risk assessment, that's the consequences, and be prepared. You go back to your videotape of your preparedness episode, the preparedness with the flower pot and the candle. That's the way I'm thinking with that. But I feel it's the personal mission statement and what your ethics and views are alongside with the ethics.
And it's important for you to be understood by what ethical boundaries you have. You know, if they want a sneaky snake, they're not going to find it in me. If they want somebody who doesn't care about the law and just wants to make sure that we win, they're not going to find that in me. I will take the ethical standpoint and say, you know, we have to think about our kids. You know, somebody says, we just have to win. Well, these days, that's a really hard conversation to have. And I'm not saying that there's any right or wrong, because all of those boundaries are sort of blurred depending upon where you're looking from. Any conversations? Anyone? Thoughts? See, here's part of our challenge in the cybersecurity arena. We hold some exceedingly powerful tools. And, you know, I don't have any tools with me, but, you know, your screwdriver can be used for good to help build a homeless shelter, but your screwdriver can also be used to short-circuit somebody's power grid and, you know, bring down your competition or whatever. From a cybersecurity standpoint, the people who don't have that ethical border that they've set up for themselves are like, yeah, this should be fun. You know, it doesn't affect me. Why do I care? And I go off and I, do something against, let's say a nursery in Democratic Republic of the Congo, still running Wyze Cam 1s or whatever. Hey, should be fun. That is not the path that I want our people to even be considering. You've got to have that ethical backbone that drives you. You are not just techies. You are techies that hold the switch to good and evil. And it's a terrible way to say it, but it's good and evil. So be prepared. Talk it within yourself each and every day. Not just, ooh, what fun. Let's go see what it looks like to crash, Dole pineapples or Chiquita bananas. That's not the way to do it. My opinion. Thoughts? Ethics are a tremendously valuable thing for you to be thinking about, because you are going to be approached by a C-suite person. And they're going to say, what should I do? And what you suggest or what you practice should be one that you can defend morally and ethically. You may not think about it early on, but it should definitely define to you what you are and are not willing to do. And I don't have the answer because everything is situational. I can't say always do X, Y, or Z, because it's not that simple. But think about it. For example, I had my bank account was with certain bank, and they didn't agree to what I wanted to do for my password. I wanted to make a very long, very complex password, and they said, no, it has to be, maximum of this size and maximum of this characters. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to another bank. And I left. I didn't go in and say, well, I'll teach you. Don't do that. I've watched people, I'll give an example of one, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but at our service desk, we had somebody that was sort of an out-of-work programmer. And this person could do all sorts of things. So this person wanted to do all sorts of things in the name of learning. But what happened was this person installed like 40 different applications on his computer because he had an admin account. And he could, none of which were approved, none of which were licensed, and none of which were paid for by the people who owned the laptop and had hired him. And in the end, here's the bad thing. And think about it this way. This person left the organization to go get, believe it or not, a system admin job with the federal government. But what had occurred here started a criminal investigation against him. So here he is here with a background investigation that was clear, but now there's a criminal investigation going on this guy's going to lose this job because of what he did over here trying to learn. Well, I can do this, and I can do this, and you guys should do this. Well, you're not doing that? Well, I'll do it. Literally, people would call in and say, my XYZ isn't working. And he'd say, I know how to fix that. Blah, 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 blah. Done. It's working now. But the way he did it was not valid. I'm sorry, it worked, but it wasn't approved, and it caused problems that were experienced down the road. So his approach was not a good approach. It got the customer back to work, but in the long run, caused him to fall under criminal investigation. I helped with the criminal investigation. And I can guarantee you this person is not working for the federal government anymore. Okay? Always pursue the morally right approach. Moral, ethical, and legal. Leave it for somebody else to do those questionable actions and make those questionable calls. And if somebody's, let's say your CISO says, well, I need you to do it anyway, I got a real problem doing that because I know it's against the law and you know it's against the law. If you want me to do it, put it in writing. And he won't, he or she. Because what they're doing is they're asking you to be responsible for an act that you don't want to do. Stick to your guns. It's a hard call, but you want to be able to walk into an office, into a meeting, into a team, and have them say, this person can be trusted. Okay? Any questions? Any comments? Yes, Harminder. Wait, you're muted.
So I have a question. So what is the difference between ethical and policy? Both are same thing, because we have to, when we are working in the organization, we have to follow the ethical. It is just like a policy, that we have to follow the policy.
Policies are written in such a manner that they inherently should be ethical. If you find there's an ethical loophole where it says I'm supposed to do something that I really shouldn't do, then that's when you discuss the policy with your supervisors or whatever and say, this could get us in hot water. I remember when I was working in IT for a number of groups, we always had this saying, do we want our bosses on the front cover of the New York Times tomorrow? And the answer was always no. So be thinking about your boss and say, if the policy says we will do this, like we're going to install unlicensed software, really, maybe we should reconsider that, because I don't like handcuffs. Do you? If you tell me to do it, great. Put it in writing. But people won't go that far.
Thank you, got it.
They do need that voice of reason to say, have you thought about what you're asking us to do? I see a problem here. And you can address it as a third party. There's this problem. And it's that you have asked us to do something that I'm not ethically comfortable doing, because this could cause problems down the road and we could all get fired. Okay? Cool. Thanks, guys. That's all I got for today, and I really appreciate everybody participating. Nerman, you did a fabulous job. Thank you. That
Yes, you
that
did.
research was exactly right. The next stage to that is, what should we do? And always be thinking about that next stage, because when you are in a position of trust, they're going to ask you that. Okay, what does all this mean? What should we do? So always be thinking about the full path toward any situation, anything that the headlines scream about, movie stars are going to lose millions. What does that mean for real? Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Chris, any last minute?
No, I had to go to my wife.
All right.
Priorities.
Okay. Everybody have a great one, and we'll talk later.
Bye.
Thanks
Bye, guys.
again.